In a quiet neighborhood in Lagos, there lived a woman named Grace and her only son, Michael. Grace was a single mother, working tirelessly as a nurse in the city. She loved Michael deeply and did everything she could to raise him well. She was proud of his kind heart, good manners, and the way he always helped her around the house. Though life wasn't always easy, they had each other, and that was enough for Grace. When Michael turned 12, Grace noticed a change in him. He was no longer the cheerful boy she knew. He seemed distant, lost in his own world, spending more time outside with a new friend he'd met at school. His friend's name was Ben, and though Grace hadn't met him yet, she could tell he was a big part of Michael's life. At first, Grace thought this was normal. After all, every boy needed friends. But then she began to see troubling signs. Michael's grades, which used to be top-notch, started slipping. His teachers called, saying he seemed distracted in class. He stopped helping her around the house, stayed out late, and sometimes didn't even come home until after dark. Grace's heart grew heavy with worry. One evening, Grace finally met Ben. He was tall for his age, with a hardened look that didn't match the boys she knew. Ben barely greeted her, his eyes drifting away whenever she spoke to him. When he and Michael disappeared into the room, she overheard Ben talking about things that made her uncomfortable, talk of sneaking into places they didn't belong, and how stealing small things didn't really matter. That night, Grace couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned, the words ringing in her mind. She knew she had to talk to Michael about Ben, but she also knew her son was at a delicate age. Confronting him too harshly could push him further away. She decided to be gentle, to make him understand the importance of choosing the right friends. The next day, Grace waited for Michael after school, hoping they could talk on the walk home. But instead, Michael went straight to Ben's house. He didn't call, didn't check in, and only returned much later, his eyes looking tired and lost. When she asked where he'd been, Michael brushed her off, mumbling about hanging out and saying, "It's not a big deal, Mom." Days turned into weeks, and Grace's worry grew deeper. Her once gentle, responsible son now seemed like a stranger. She'd hear him and Ben talking in hushed tones, making plans that she could never fully catch. Then one day, her worst fears came to life. It was a Saturday and Grace was home, folding laundry, when she got a frantic call from the police. Her heart stopped as she listened to the officer's voice, telling her that Michael had been caught with a group of boys, including Ben, attempting to steal a man's wallet in a busy market. The officer asked her to come down to the station. Grace rushed to the police station, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and shame. She saw Michael sitting on a bench, looking down at his hands, his face pale. Her heart ached as she took in the sight of her son, so lost, caught up in something he barely understood. When they got home, Grace held him close, her heart breaking as he finally opened up. He admitted that Ben had pressured him into doing things he didn't want to do. "He said it made us tough," Michael whispered, his voice cracking. "He said it was the only way to be cool, to be respected." Grace listened, her heart heavy with sadness and anger, but she knew she couldn't place all the blame on Ben. She had seen the signs and ignored them, hoping it would all pass. Now her son was in trouble, tangled in a web of choices he didn't fully understand. After that night, Grace knew she had to protect her son and help him understand the importance of his choices. She gently explained to Michael that real friends would never pressure him to do things that felt wrong. She told him how much she loved him and how much his future mattered to her. Michael listened quietly, nodding, his face a mix of guilt and relief. For a few days, things seemed to improve. Michael started coming home early, spending more time with his mother, and avoiding Ben. But Ben wasn't ready to let go. He showed up at their house one evening, knocking on the door and calling out for Michael. Grace opened the door, her face calm but firm. "I think it's best you leave," she told Ben. "Michael doesn't need friends who get him into trouble." Ben scoffed, looking at her with a cold, mocking smile. "You think he can live without me?" he sneered. "Michael wants to be someone in this city. You can't keep him under your wing forever." Grace stayed calm, but her heart raced. She closed the door, hoping Ben would get the message. But as days passed, she noticed strange things. Ben would show up outside their house, hanging around on the street corner. Once, she even caught a glimpse of him staring up at their window in the evening, a sinister look on his face. It sent chills down her spine. Despite her warnings, Michael couldn't resist Ben's pull. One day after school, Ben cornered Michael, telling him about a plan to make quick money. He promised it would be an easy job, just delivering a small package to someone in town. The thought of having money tempted Michael, and against his mother's advice, he followed Ben once again. That night, Grace waited, watching the clock as hours passed. Her worry grew into a gnawing fear. It was midnight when the phone rang. This time, it wasn't the police, it was the hospital. Michael had been found unconscious on the side of the road, his pockets empty. Ben had disappeared, leaving Michael alone in a dangerous part of town after things had gone wrong during the delivery. Grace rushed to the hospital, her heart breaking as she saw her son lying on the bed, his face bruised, a tear slowly slipping down his cheek as he whispered, "I'm sorry, Mom." "I didn't listen." Grace held his hand, her heart shattered. She knew Michael had learned a painful lesson, one that had cost him dearly. And as he lay there, recovering, she stayed by his side, hoping that this time he'd truly understand the importance of choosing his friends wisely. As Michael recovered, Grace stayed by his side, praying that this experience would change him for the better. She made sure he knew how much he was loved and reminded him of the potential he had if he chose the right path. Slowly, Michael seemed to understand. He began to share more openly with her about the pressures he felt, his fears, and the insecurities that had drawn him to someone like Ben in the first place. When Michael finally returned home, Grace knew they couldn't pretend everything was fine. She enrolled him in counseling, hoping he'd find a safe space to deal with his emotions and the regrets that weighed on him. Michael, though reluctant at first, slowly opened up. He learned that he wasn't alone, that there were other boys who had also been pressured by so-called friends and who struggled with the desire to fit in. Grace also got involved, joining community meetings and sharing her story with other parents. She hoped to warn them to pay attention to the friendships their children formed, especially in a city as big and sometimes unforgiving as Lagos. As months went by, Michael began to find himself again. He avoided the old crowd and, with his mother's encouragement, found a new passion in sports. He joined a local soccer team, where he made friends who valued him for who he was, not for what he could do for them. But then, one evening, just as things seemed to be settling down, a familiar face appeared in their neighborhood. Ben. He looked rougher, older, and carried the same hardened gaze. He called out to Michael, saying he had one last job, something that would earn them enough money to leave the city for good. Michael froze, his mind racing with memories of that night in the hospital. But as Ben waited, Michael did something he never thought he could. He turned, looked his former friend in the eye, and said, "No, I'm done." Ben smirked, muttered something under his breath, and disappeared into the shadows. But this time, Michael didn't follow. He stood there, watching Ben go, feeling a weight lift from his chest. That night, Grace hugged him tightly, her heart full of pride and relief. She knew it was over, that Michael had finally made the right choice. And together, they began to rebuild, trusting that, with time, the scars would heal. Michael had faced his greatest test and come out stronger, learning a valuable lesson about loyalty, self-worth, and the importance of true friendship. Grace, too, had grown, realizing the power of a mother's love and the importance of guiding her son even through his hardest moments. They moved forward together, closer than ever, and though the scars of that chapter remained, they became reminders of the strength they both found within themselves. This story reminds us of the importance of guiding our children carefully, especially in choosing their friends. True friends will never lead us down a path that brings us pain or regret. Every parent should pay close attention to the influences in their child's life, and every child should remember that the right friends will support, not pressure them. As we've seen with Michael, sometimes the people who seem the most exciting can lead us into trouble. But with the right guidance and strength, we can overcome these challenges and make better choices for our future. What did you learn from this story? Please share your thoughts in the comments section below. Let us know if you've faced similar situations or if this story reminded you of someone you know. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and share it with others who might find it meaningful. Don't forget to subscribe for more moral stories like this one.